All right, let's get started. Welcome to Fund Your Life-Saving, How to Apply for 2026 Rachael Ray No-Kill Excellence grants and Rachael Ray Save Them All grants. My name is Caitlin Durkin. I'm the manager of Network Partner Relationships for Best Friends Animal Society. I'm here on behalf of my colleague Kylie Hatch, who runs this grant program. She unfortunately had something urgent come up, so she wasn't able to moderate today. During this session, we're going to talk about the goals for these grant programs, how to apply for them, and the elements of a competitive proposal. But before we do all that, we have to do our boring Zoom stuff. Couple ways to get in touch with me and the panelists today. You have the chat, which you all are already using. Make sure in the to section you are sharing with everyone. If you want to talk to everyone, it might default to just host and panelists. You also have Q&A. The Q&A is really important. We should have some time for open Q&A at the end of this. If you put your questions in the chat, I probably won't see it because there's lots of you here. But if you put in the Q&A, I'll be able to see it, and that'll give it the best chance that I'm able to ask it of our panelists. We also have closed captioning enabled on our end. If you want to see it, you also need to enable it on your end. So if you look at the screen inside the purple box, that's where you want to click to get those closed captions. And then feedback, additional questions, you can email us at bfnetwork@bestfriends.org. We will also have a one question survey at the end. Just let us know how we're doing because we want to make sure this is a good use of your time. So let me introduce our other panelists for today. We have Carolyn Fitzgerald, Senior Strategist for the East Region at Best Friends, and John Graves, Strategist for the East Region. They are two of the people who are going to be reviewing these grant applications. So they're going to tell you what the goals are and what's going to catch their attention, make something really competitive for funding. Then we have Sally Heins-Limberty, the Senior Manager of Enterprise Data Management, again at Best Friends. She's going to talk through how you can use data to inform your life saving. This is something that's really important for these two grants, but just really valuable information in general. And then I will share with you some of the logistics for applying for these grants, where you will do that, and important dates. And then finally, question and answer as well. So with that, let me send it over to Carolyn and John.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. We're excited to talk to you about this year's Rachael Ray grant processes and provide clarification that we hope will help you guys create the strongest letter of intent and potentially full applications. These grants are a great way for people to collaborate and make commitment to impactful programming that will help you and potentially other organizations save more lives. Some of you may be really familiar with this process, and if you're not, we hope to provide some information to assist you in the grant cycle. Next slide. So we're going to go over some definitions. John's going to do that with you, so I'll pass it to my colleague, John.
So, thank you, Carolyn. The first definition we're going to unpack here today is what is no-kill. No-kill doesn't mean saving every single animal in a shelter. It means saving every dog and cat that can and should have a live outcome. The 90% benchmark exists because 100% is not feasible for most shelters. There will always be unsavable medical cases, public safety considerations, and quality of life decisions that need to be made. Best Friends outlines the definition of no-kill very clearly, and I always recommend having that website linked to a QR code in your shelters to really help drive this conversation and give total clarity around what no-kill really means. The 90% benchmark has been well studied in shelters across the country and is achievable through successful implementation of life-saving programs in your shelter and in your community. If your shelter seems to be falling short of this benchmark, but you have strong community cat programs, pet safety net operations, open adoption policies, and other institutional programs, reach out to your strategist and we can talk about an evaluation to see where we might be missing something, or even talk about our no-kill exemption process. We understand that 90% really is a moving target. So next we're talking about the life-saving gap. And the life-saving gap is the number of animals, dogs and cats, who would have had to have been saved last year to achieve 90% save rate threshold. If you're curious how we do it, here's the calculation we use to determine the life-saving gap. But what we are also talking about is, so as an example, if your shelter takes in 100 animals, a no-kill shelter will be able to save 90 or more of those animals. So if your shelter is losing 15 animals or 15%, we'd be looking to close that gap of 5 animals. To dig a little deeper into that as well, say your shelter takes in 50 dogs and 50 cats. You save 55 cats and 30 dogs. This would mean you have saved 85 out of 100 animals, which leaves you with a gap of 5 dogs. And part of the reason we bring this up is projects that prioritize closing that specific life-saving gap are often the most competitive and given the most consideration. A no-kill community is a little different. And when we say no-kill community, what we're actually looking at is getting the community itself to achieve 90%. And we look at every brick and mortar shelter located within a county to have a save rate of 90% or higher. So we're not looking at total like rescues. We're looking at each individual agency having 90% or higher. Again, as we're looking down, we're looking into the specific counties within a state. This requires significant collaboration between local agencies and a community, as well as a commitment to a common goal. I often recommend biannual meetings with local partners to help clear the air, set goals, and keep everyone on track. Rachael Ray are also great ways to engage that collaboration between agencies and an excellent way to make your project more competitive. The more people that are involved within a community or within a project, the more competitive it is. Okay, and then so the Pet Lifesaving Dashboard. I don't know if you all are familiar with this. It's one of the best tools Best Friends has. In my opinion, this helps you identify specific gaps in your community and focus your grant to closing that gap. The Pet Lifesaving Dashboard will show you national, state, and individual organization data to help inform your proposal. And then lastly, if you really want to dig in, you can look at your state and then you can hover on these individual agencies within your community and see where everyone's at and where there may be some opportunities to collaborate.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks, John. My name is Sally, and I just have a few short slides to share with you today. As all of the information that John gave you just a few minutes ago, it's very clear that we want to look at the data to drive these decisions that we're making. And it's really what's going to make you successful in creating a successful proposal for your grant, which is why you're here today. So just very basics to start off. This is a little tidbit that we use in a lot of the materials that my team at Best Friends uses, and that is data tells an accurate and measurable story about how each agency is meeting the needs of the community and when more support is required. So, as John was just saying, in the sense of looking at a whole community, this is where we really can activate what needs to happen to get us where we're trying to go. So you may be wondering, what if I'm new to data? A lot of us are already, well on our way and utilizing a lot of resources in that way, but some folks are not. And we definitely have resources available aside from those individual meetings that you can have with your regional strategist. And I don't want to discredit the importance of those because each situation is a little bit different. And that's when you can have a chance to really analyze what's happening at your shelter in your community on a one-on-one basis. But for, more broad speaking resources, we do have a module. It's called Gathering Data for Shelters. And this is a self-paced training. What I like about that is not only can you do it when you have time, which we know that probably none of you have enough of, but it means that you can also just pick out the pieces that are most relevant to you. So we'll be happy to share the link to this module. All of the sections are outlined in the left-hand column on the tool so that if you have a particular area where you're feeling stumped or could use a little bit more guidance, you can just go pick out what you need and benefit from that resource. And then finally, on here, this is really geared towards shelters that are doing, or shelters or rescues that are doing intakes and outcomes. So sometimes, when we start to get into a breakdown of species or a breakdown of different intake subtypes and a breakdown of different outcome subtypes, what seems like it might be relatively straightforward can get a little bit confusing. So, you know, some of us don't like to do the math, but we have this handy Excel template that we are also happy to share. Within this template, there's a monthly option for tracking your monthly data, which of course is always preferable. It's going to give you more insight and more information. But if you don't have that granularity available, there's also an annual option on this template. As mentioned, it'll do all the calculations for you. The formulas are built in there. So all you need to do is find the box, enter your number, and you'll be well on your way. Okay, this is a little bit of an overview of just making data-driven decisions in general, but I want to call out a couple of points that are going to align with steps in the process that you're considering today. So before you begin any project, obviously you're going to assess where you are. This is your baseline. Most likely, if you're attending this webinar, you already have a baseline idea of your data. So you have an idea of what numbers you're looking to move the needle on. You have an idea of where you're at. If you don't, or if you don't have that fully documented, now is the time to do so. This is the step that we're on today. We need to get that baseline entry-level data documented for this grant cycle. So from there, what you're going to do is step back and look at that data if you have it already, and this is when you're going to strategize. So this is creating a plan. So I look at my intakes and outcomes. I say, you know, I think I could achieve, you know, a reduction in that gap that I have to 90% if I were to increase positive outcomes for cats. So at that point, that's when you would go ahead and create a plan, put that in your proposal, which will come in the grant LOI that Caitlin's going to talk about a little bit later. And then from there is when we're going to get into the cycle of measuring that impact. So when we're ready to measure, we're going back to the same data points that we used in our baseline, and we will outline some of those important data points that your strategist and the committee would like to see in the application. So we'll provide those for you. So you're going to measure those each quarter to see exactly where you're going. And then when you're measuring those, of course, you're going to stop and learn and adjust. And in my mind, this is really where the magic happens with making data-driven decisions, because this is when we can say, oh, wow, you know, I thought that this program was going to lead to quick success in this area, but it's not actually what happened. So it never fails to surprise me that I can think I have a really solid hypothesis about, you know, how this is going to work. When I step back and objectively look at that data, I realize that maybe things aren't exactly what I anticipated. So it's the perfect time to make a few tweaks, make a few adjustments, especially because you'll be doing this quarterly. So it's a great time to, you know, shift around a little bit if you need to. And then finally, in any data-driven decision cycle, you're going to want to share your findings. At Best Friends, we really believe in data transparency across the board. So we hope that when you do take these learnings and you do make the adjustments and you do see successes or you do see challenges, that you will be willing to share those with others so that they can hopefully replicate or you know, learn from the stumbles that you had along the way. And then, of course, that brings us back to the beginning and you're ready to start the cycle over again.
Thanks so much, Sally. So now we're going to get into the grants. Which grant should you apply for? So there's two types of grants, which you've seen in previous years: Save Them All and No-Kill Excellence grants. Save Them All grants apply to shelters that have yet to achieve no-kill, or for no-kill organizations planning to help another shelter achieve no-kill. The No-Kill Excellence grants apply to no-kill organizations looking to sustain their no-kill status, implement new life-saving in their community, or mentor another shelter on a program they have found successful. So you can only apply for one, which is a change for this year, but don't worry. If you apply for the wrong one, as we're reviewing your applications, we may come back and say to you, hey, this would really be better fit over in this category. We'll be able to adjust it on our end. We recommend you copy and paste this information provided for the specific projects. And if you have any questions, we always recommend setting up a consultation with your specific region strategist. And you can find who your region strategist is on our network partner site under who we are, and pick your state and you'll get it. If you're in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Florida, just to give the pitch, you would contact me. And now I'm going to hand it over. I'm not going to hand it over. I am to John to talk about Save Them All grants.
So Save Them All grants, they close the gap by reducing shelter death in your own shelter or a partner shelter. They're open to public and private shelters, as well as rescue groups and other animal welfare organizations focus on impacting life-saving at shelters. The funding cap is $50,000, not to be exceeding 10% of your operating budget. So if your operating budget is $50,000, you can apply for up to $5,000. And don't be discouraged if you're a smaller agency and applying for a smaller grant. Small grants are more competitive and they can lead to bigger things. In 2022, we funded a fledgling organization here in North Carolina with $2,500 to start a CCP. That grant helped us open the door to the shelter, and now it's one of the largest and most successful projects we have in this state. So, yeah. Here's some examples of some, impacted grant ideas for large dogs. So last year in North Carolina, we had a grant for a nonprofit collaborating with their local shelter to divert intake of large dogs by providing resources to owners to help them keep their pets. And these resources ranged from behavior intervention, temporary foster, medical support, and just providing supplies to help owners retain their pets. And in 2025, that shelter achieved 90% for the first time. So yeah, we look at all these kind of different ideas. Also, don't be afraid to copy and paste this stuff and send it right on into with your LOI. We are more than happy to have that be part of the process. So yeah, and then we're talking about some opportunities for life-saving gap of neonatal kittens. Here's some great, again, language you can copy and paste right into the LOI. We're usually looking at expanding fosters, helping fund kitten kits, funding for training neonate care are great examples of neonate project goals as well. And then life-saving gap of community cats. My favorite. I love a good community cat program. So here's again some things you can drop right in that LOI. And one of the most important aspects of a grant aimed at implementing a successful community cat program is directly diverting intake from your regional shelter. So rather than just having what we would call a kind of non-prioritized or non-targeted TNVR, if you can keep the cat from coming into the shelter in the first place through intake diversion working with your shelter, if you're outside of your shelter, or if you are your shelter, anything that can actually divert the intake, with the CCP is going to, again, make that more stronger, more successful program. Yeah.
All right, so we'll go over a few No-Kill Excellent grants. So these are really to celebrate the groups that are leading the movement through innovative partnerships, mentorships, and progressive collaboration within your community. This helps no-kill organizations maintain their life-saving while also assisting other organizations in the community to reach 90%. Closing a life-saving gap by reducing shelter death in other shelters. So an organization who's a no-kill organization can then help the other ones achieve that. These really work well. I've seen when they're close to you physically, but also my other colleagues have had them from other states. The funding cap is $60,000, not exceeding 10% of your operating budget. And I don't do math that well, so we'll let someone go for that. So for No-Kill Excellence, just like John had mentioned with Save Them All, these are things you can add in, copy and paste over into a grant format, tailoring it to your organization. So a big one is immediate rescue and transfer. So supporting a shelter who has overcapacity issues and pulling those animals into your own facility or to partner organizations and arranging that for them. Expanding foster programs is a really great way to help you maintain your no-kill save rate. Also, there are shelter collaboration programs for managing different kittens and helping build out neonatal programs. So we can go through all of these and receive these after the webinar is over. Next slide. No-Kill Excellent projects for a life-saving gap, which go back to the rescue and transfer, expanding foster network, adoption events, and then engaging in community to raise awareness for specifically large dogs in those communities and helping them expand their life-saving rate through that. Next slide. Oh, then handing it back over to Caitlin.
All right, so timeline and application process. We are pretty much ready to get started with this. The LOI, which stands for letter of interest or sometimes letter of intent, is the first step in this process. And like every other step in this process, it's going to happen through Foundant, which is the grant portal that we use for the Rachael Ray No-Kill Excellence and Save Them All grants. This does require a login. If you have applied in previous years, you can, and you are with the same organization, same email address, you can use that email address again to log in. There is a forgot password function. If you are brand new to this, you'll need to set up an account with that. We will, I've seen a couple of you ask, we are going to share out all of these slides and the recording. So you will have all of these links ready to go. So it will be a specific link that you click on to get to this. If you go to the next slide. All right, so on your LOI, the point is to ask you some basic high-level questions about your project proposal. We want to assess to see if that's going to be a good fit for the funding goals. And then if that is successful, we'll move you on to an application stage where we will ask for more detailed questions. We do this two-step phase really to make sure that we're saving you time. We don't want to ask you to make a really long grant proposal if we know that that's not going to end up in funding for your project. We want to make sure that you are using your time well. So on your LOI, we want to make sure that you are identifying the life-saving gap. So remember, that's the population of animals and the number of animals you would need to save in order to get your shelter or a shelter that you are supporting to that 90% benchmark. You're going to identify the tactics. So how will your project close that gap? Again, Carolyn and John gave you some examples. You are very welcome to copy and paste those and just tailor them to your own project and organization. But those are just examples. You might have other things that you've seen work really well that you want to expand or try new at your organization. And then you want to quantify your impact. How many pets? What kinds of pets? So that means species, but if you're focusing on neonates, we're going to want to know that. If you're focusing on seniors, we'll want to know that. And where are they located? So I've seen a couple of you ask in the Q&A, like, I'm not a shelter, I'm a TMVR organization, or I'm a rescue. You're going to be helping your community though, right? You're having an impact on pets who have been at a shelter, who would have gone to a shelter unnecessarily if you weren't doing that work. So you want to focus on where are you having this impact. If you get through the LOI stage, then we will assess. Some will get through to the application stage, and then after that, we will have the grants awarded. Go to the next slide, please. There are two requirements. One is that you are a Best Friends Network partner. Network Partnership is a completely free program that allows us to get in touch with you and share resources and information that we think will make your very difficult jobs just a little bit easier. We have links here to show who is already registered as a network partner. And if you aren't yet, to apply, our response time to those applications is usually like 3 to 4 days maximum. As Sally said, data sharing with us and just assessing for yourself is really important to these projects and life-saving more generally. So we have a data sharing requirement for this. If you are an organization that does animal intakes and outcomes, that will be through Shelter Pet Data Alliance. And we have the link here for where you can create your account and submit data. You can submit manually. We also have automatic connections with PetPoint and Shelter Buddy as well. Make that really easy for you. If you are an organization that does not do animal intakes or outcomes, so say you're a TMVR organization, we have a different way for you to go about submitting your impact on community life saving. And so again, separate link for you all to submit that. We can do the next slide. I think we missed one. oh, bless she finds it. Timeline, LOI is going to open on Monday. So you all can click on the Found It link right now, and you'll be able to look at it, but you're not going to be able to submit anything until Monday. You'll have about 4 weeks until that is due. I believe it's September 13th, but I forget the exact date, roughly around there, and we'll get the exact date for you. That's when the LOI is going to be due, and we're going to start reviewing. September 16th, you got 2 bonus days. So opens August 11th. It's due September 16th. Our teams will review it. We will send LOI decisions in early October. That's going to be to let you know whether or not you have made it to that full application stage. November 3rd, the application will be due. In early December, we're going to send the final decisions. And if you are a grant recipient, you will get the contracts then, and we'll ask for those to be back by December 19th. And then start off 2026 really well. That's when the grant checks will be sent. January 2nd is our target date for that. And now I think we're in Q&A time. We've got a lot of them, which is lovely. Let's see. Okay, so someone is asking us, would an application for a project intended to raise the save rate for a shelter with an extremely low save rate be considered competitive?
Yes. And I think it depends the relationships within the states and how that's all going to work. So this is one of the ones I would connect with your region strategist to talk about the shelter with the low save rate that you're going to work with to make sure that the relationship is there, that the work you're intending to do can actually get done, and that they're willing to work to do that work. John?
The words right out of my mouth, Carolyn. Perfect. Yes, exactly what I said. Yeah, relationship to the shelter is probably the most important piece there. Yeah.
Love getting an easy answer of just yes, though. That's amazing. So we've all mentioned community cats, TNDR organizations. We have a couple questions from organizations like that. How could they make their application most competitive? What kind of data and tactics would you all be looking for in those submissions?
So reinstate that having it tied to the shelter in any possible way is what makes it most competitive. So helping keep the animal from coming into the shelter in the first place, the cat's coming into the shelter in the first place. So having a letter of support or having them apply with you if your local shelter is going to make them most competitive. I also always look at like holistic implementation of a community cat program. So that you're looking at not just trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, but you're also looking at how you're managing your resources now and going forward. Resources like veterinary access, funding, obviously, even supplies, things like that. How you're engaging your community, and also are you implementing nuisance mitigation practices to help deter these nuisance calls from coming all the way up to your shelter?
What John said. He's always given great advice for CCP programs. So.
All right, so I'm going to do a data question to you, Sally. So Adrienne wants to use the Pet Lifesaving dashboard, but suspects that there are some shelters near them who are not sharing data. They have knowledge that these shelters are likely not near no-kill yet and wants to partner and support them. What would you suggest for someone in this situation?
I think that it kind of goes back to the answer about the relationship that we just heard. So to make these programs successful, it's most likely that you're going to need to have a relationship with that shelter. So our first, recommendation from my team would be to reach out directly to that shelter and have a discussion with them about their data, figure out what they are willing to be transparent with, what they're willing to share with best friends. Of course, we need to measure the success of these grants. And in order to do that, we need to have the data. If you're not seeing it on the Best Friends Pet Lifesaving dashboard, that means that we don't have it. So, certainly reaching out directly to that shelter would be a first step. If you need some tips and tricks on how to do that, given a particular situation and or something happening locally for you, that's something that your strategist can definitely advise you on the best approach.
What I would add to that too is finding a shelter like regionally or even within the same state that is like publicly sharing their data and giving an example for them, to see that. Like, so for me in North Carolina, Onslow County is one of our partners we work really closely with, and they're not yet a no-kill. They're working really hard to get there, but they also started sharing data over the last few years really transparently, and they get overwhelming support and really great questions and engagement with their community every month. So it's a scary thing for a lot of shelters to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've also got a question from someone saying that their shelter has hit the 90% benchmark in the past, but did not in the last year. They're concerned they have a pretty small life-saving gap, that they might not have a strong case for Save Them All, but they don't have the capacity to apply for the No-Kill Excellence grant. What would you all recommend for someone in that small life-saving gap situation?
I would definitely suggest applying for one because you're going to be more competitive than you think. These small grants can really go a long way, because obviously there's a limited amount of money in the pot, and we can give these small grants for a large turnaround. Super competitive. The other thing I would say is, again, really digging into what caused that backslide and how to intervene with that backslide. So is it dogs? Is it cats? Is it large dogs? What were they able to save before that they weren't saving now? And again, if they have this programming in place and it is really robust, then talk to your strategist about what a no-kill exemption process looks like.
Yeah, your region strategist or your state strategist can really help you go through your data as well to look at the granular aspects of this and provide an analysis for you that you might not see. Sometimes it's that second set of eyes that helps. And for those of us, and I include myself in this, who are not numbers people and we don't see things a certain way, always having someone else to look over those numbers really is useful.
Thank you all. Let's look at the other side of things. So if you are a shelter who has already achieved a 90% or higher save rate, how would you recommend that they approach this grant process?
They've already achieved a 90% save rate.
Yes.
I think that's a definite good place to start with a no-kill excellent grant. Is this recent? Is this a year? Is this 6 months, right? How entrenched are you? And can you then use that to maintain your 90%? I recently, I think last year, I have a shelter who had 90% for cats, for felines, and they were using this and had no kill for dogs, and they were hitting a cap for how much they could do and how much funding they had. So the No Kill Excellence grant allowed them to maintain this programming for another year and expand it. It was to transfer animals out of their shelter up north into New England. So I think that's one of the ways to look at it is like, what do we need to sustain this? And if this is like, hey, this was easy, which we all know it's not, then you should look at what shelters in my community can I help support so we can become a no-kill community.
Or maybe you have a program that you want to help another shelter implement. Those can be really successful. Or you have a new program that you want to put into place and make sure you sustain that no-kill excellent grant. So we love new programming. We really love piloting new ideas. So don't be afraid to throw some new ideas at us too. Get weird.
Yes, so one of the things we look at for the No-Kill Excellence grants is the element of innovation, of being the leader in this space. We know both it's really hard to maintain 90% even after you've achieved it. Most do, which is excellent, but it's still really hard to do. So we'll ask for what you can do to sustain it. But like John said, innovative, trying new things, being a model for other organizations is something that we're looking for with that. Let's see. For shelter pet data lines, for sharing information, Sally, how far back would you want to get data for?
I believe the requirement for this grant is through July of 2025. We would need your monthly data for the first 7 months of this year, and then your entire calendar year of data for 2024.
Yes, thank you. We like to have the data to measure current work against past work. We want to see progress, not just in the abstract, but from where you were. We know that life-saving in shelters and rescues is really complicated. And we want to make sure that you are working off of a baseline and doing something that's really achievable for you. We've got some questions here just about logistics for the LOI. So how long is it? It is specific questions with a character limit, so pretty short. And then Kelly asked if we could share the LOI questions. I like that idea. So yes, we'll work that out and send it with the email for this. Let's see what else we got. So when are the LOIs due? September 16th. So you've got a little over a month to noodle on that. Are these grant funds applicable for capital gains projects or for things like purchasing a van for transport? I'll throw that out to you all to discuss.
Carolyn, are you gonna do it or? So I will say that those are harder to fund a lot of times. The ones that are like purchasing a vehicle or that are for physical improvements to a facility improvements. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying never. Usually they're part of like that's one part of the project, right? We tend to fund more of like what's going to directly impact life saving now and today, and not what might happen down the road. And we all know that also space doesn't always mean more life-saving. Programs is really what's going to implement it and hit it right now.
Yep. I think John put that the best way possible is when looking at these grants, we're trying to save the lives in front of us. And like we know with capital projects, they can be delayed with construction for a significant period of time. There are showing how a transport van may directly impact life-saving where it's tied to those numbers, I think could make the case more compelling, and getting that up and running in a time frame for this grant would need to be part of that process. Hope that helps.
Thank you all. So how would you recommend organizations who are doing a lot of intake diversion? So they are not just community cats, but let's talk about owned pets, making sure that animals are not entering the shelter unless it's necessary. How would you see them fitting into this grant process?
Well, I'm going to combine that question with another one I saw where someone had asked, they're a Spaniard group for owned animals. And so that's one opportunity where you can partner with the shelter to offer that Spaniard owned animals. So if you've got someone who's going to surrender in part because they can't afford to have their pet fixed, you can offer that to them as part of that intake diversion. That's part of what we offered with the large dog grant that we did for intake diversion last year. And then implementations of programming like Pet Academy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but it's a great organization that helps with intake diversion through behavior support for community pets. It's basically access to licensed and trained behaviorists at a fraction of the cost. So if you're in a rural community where you don't have access to a behaviorist and your shelter doesn't have the capacity or the funding or whatever for behaviorists, it's a really great way to get there. And then of course, like just different supplies and medical support and things that can help keep people with their pets.
All right, great, thank you. Yes, community engagement is a really important part of these grants. I would say if you're not a shelter or rescue doing intake or outcome, you might need to do a little bit more thinking in terms of the data that you can submit, but it's there. Like you all are having measurable impacts on your community, on the pets and the people in your community. So if you could look at what good have you done and what more good do you want to do, both in terms of numbers and stories, particular kinds of animals, that's really valuable to put into these proposals. All right, we've got lots of questions, so I'm sorry, I have to read through. It's hard to get through all of these. All right. Ooh, cat question. All right. So, this person's parish so I'm guessing they're in Louisiana, has one shelter that intakes dogs, but none that intakes cats. They are a TNVR group, but what we had just recommended on the save rate for cats in their local shelter is not going to apply. Do you have recommendations for someone in this situation?
If I'm being honest, that's going to be a hard one for us to fund because it's not tied to shelter death. We do have some really great informations and learning modules and things like that on our website on increasing fundraising. I'm not going to say not to apply, but it is going to be hard because again, we're not tying it directly to shelter death. So I definitely reach out to your strategist to ask them some specific questions about that. They're going to know best. But then also, like I said, looking at some of these really great fundraising, that goes for everyone. If you don't spend much time on the network page, you should definitely go there. It's one of the best things Best Friends has to offer.
Yeah. Thank you. Kind of a complicated situation for you there for sure. So take that advice into consideration, but we wouldn't say don't apply, just need to think about how the impacts that you are having are. Let's go to, so we've got someone here who works for a shelter that specializes in intaking senior dogs. Because of the population that they serve, they do not achieve a 90% save rate. They are asking if in that circumstance, though, a no-kill excellence grant might be a better fit for them than a Save Them All.
Yeah, I think I would immediately get with your state strategist to talk about what we call a no-kill exemption process. We recognize that 90% is a metric, and there are shelters who, because of the population they've taken, statistically cannot have a 90%, right? Senior dogs, senior cats are typically what we see most of this. So I would get with them on a no-kill exemption process and then talk about what a no-kill excellence grant would look like for your organization and prioritizing the dogs in those shelters to make the most movement in your community.
Thank you. So if you go back, if you rewatch this to the beginning, when John is talking about the 90% save rate is applicable for most, but not for all, this would be one of those cases where it's really falling outside of how that was designed. We also have a couple of questions from folks who are looking to influence the shelter save rate in their area, but they are representing a different organization. How much data would we need to have from that impacted shelter? Does the impacted shelter need to be a network partner? And how might they assist in getting some data from those organizations?
I might kick this one back over to Sally, actually, so that Carolyn and I are the ones talking. But I would say, yes, it is important to get the data. We do need to have the data. I don't think that the impact shelter needs to be a network partner, but I do think we have to get the data, correct?
Yeah, so certainly part of what you'll see, I believe, on the LOI, if not definitely the application stage, if you are selected for that, is some specific data points that we'd be looking for if you're working with an impacted shelter. And I believe the wording is that can you strongly encourage them? We really need your help in building that data relationship that I was talking about earlier if we don't have that, because it does help our funders make sure that these programs are effective and that we're, making decisions that are moving the needle in the way that we hope it would. I will say that Shelter Pet Data Alliance, by and large, you'll see that all over the paperwork for this grant, is preferred and definitely has the most benefits for an organization doing intakes and outcomes. However, if for some reason you are working with a shelter that is unwilling or unable to use Shelter Pet Data Alliance for data reporting, we do have some alternatives. We have a fairly quick and easy online form. It's an Airtable form, and that can be used as an official submission of data to Best Friends. So we have alternatives and we have ways to work with that, but we certainly request that the effort goes in to get the data.
Yes, and confirming that the impacted shelter does not need to be a network partner. That's not in your control. We're not going to not fund something that saves lives for something that's not in your control. Again, we'd encourage them to, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, it does, just to add, it does make the case much stronger if you could have that letter of support and you can have the data at any point in the LOI or application process, just for the fact that to show that the shelter is willing to work with you.
All right, so Zach is asking us a question about new programs versus existing programs. They're saying that they have been helping another shelter achieve 90%, which is great, but it's putting big strain on their operations. It's hard to maintain. Would funding for a project that has shown success in the past, but is hard to keep up with, would that be competitive for a grant like this?
Yes, and it's equally competitive for a new project as well. So I think that's where really talking about showing the reduction in shelter deaths at that other shelter you're supporting and making that a very strong case that the funding is needed to continue that life-saving work will be very helpful.
Yes, so great, perfect. We have some more questions about how to use SPDA. So I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability based on the information that I have. But Kayla, if you could put in the SPDA support link, that would be really great. So one person was asking, we've had a change in leadership. The admin for our SPDA account is no longer with the organization. What do I do? We have a process to adjust the owner of that account for you. So if you can contact the SPDA team through the form that Kayla is about to put in, or if you misplace that link, you can just email the network team at bfnetwork@bestfriends.org, and we'll get you set up with that as well. We also have someone saying that they're trying to set up that automatic data sharing between PetPoint and SPDA, but running into some issues with that. Yes, we can help you with that as well. So again, we're going to have you get in touch with us and our SPDA support team for that. Y'all have a lot of questions. Oh, yeah, okay. So let's talk about owner-requested euthanasias and save rate versus live release rate. So we have someone asking how owner-requested euthanasias are factored into the way that Best Friends analyzes data.
So we get this question a lot. We look at data as a whole. We look at all the data. Let's just say that. And the reason why we do that is because owner request euthanasia is another one of those things that is expected to happen and is expected to fall within that 10% window. Owner request euthanasia is exactly one of the reasons why we don't have 100% as the marker versus 90%, because owner request euthanasia for most shelters typically costs between 2 and 3%. I have seen a shelter that, we were looking at an exemption for because partially because their owner request euthanasia was really high because it's a service that they offer. They offer owner request euthanasia and cremation services actually to their community. So it's something that they are really engaging about. So they have like a 7 to 10% actual ORE than your standard shelter. So again, as part of that expectation of the 10% window and just looking at the whole data, it gives us the best real world view.
Yep. Thank you for clarifying that. We've also had a couple people ask questions about multi-pronged approaches to solving problems. Would you all say that it's better to do just one program, say maybe only fostering and only apply for a grant for fostering? Or would it be better to identify a core problem and identify maybe a couple different kinds of programs that could address that same issue?
I would say it's going to depend on like what the gap is and the size of the project. So like if you're looking at, like you're saying, large dogs is what's dying, right, at your shelter. And so we're going to do these 3 things to change what's happening to these large dogs and to help give them a live outcome. I think that is one thing. But coming and saying, we're going to implement a community cat program, a large dog intake diversion, community spaniel, like trying to do all these at one time under one grant is going to get it a lot muddier. So I would look at streamlining that. And I have said that to shelters in the past, and then we've gotten streamlined, and then we've done one project one year, and then we've done the next thing the next year. And also helps them just really hyper focus on doing kind of one thing at a time.
Yeah, I agree with John, which is frequent in this webinar. But sometimes when we splice our attention into too many areas, depending on the life-saving gap, it really can make the grant not as impactful unintentionally because of the resources of the shelter, right? So really having a clear vision of what animals are dying in your shelter or the shelter you're going to be supporting and how those programs will immediately impact those lives, I think is most useful.
Thank you. We're also getting a couple questions about who is best to share this information with best friends. So can a volunteer help you with submitting this grant? Would you all like to answer that?
It does need to have some approval from the shelter leadership. No volunteers go rogue right now and start submitting grants for your shelters and they don't know what's going on. We've had that happen, right? So really making sure that there's a consensus within the working group and having that one designated person who had to found it, log in to communicate with best friends, really make sure it's clear who will be submitting the data through SPDA. And if there's any changes, reach out to us so that we can make sure your account is updated. I've had a couple shelters have leadership changes. I saw this in the chat, and it really is simple to get it done. So that would be my recommendation.
I agree with Carolyn.
We all agree with each other. Echoing that, you can use volunteers to help you draft this information for brainstorming. You might have a volunteer who's really experienced in doing grant writing, and they can help you with this. But in terms of submitting, it needs to be from a leader at your organization, because they're going to be the ones charged with making sure it is implemented if the grant funding is approved. All right, let's talk about the two types of grants. Say you're an organization who could apply to either of them. Is there a strategy to this? Is there a better place for them to apply?
I think they should apply where they feel they are the best fit. And like we mentioned way back on the slides, if we find you can use this flow chart, which is what the network team made so beautifully for us. And if you end up in a place where we don't think you should be, we can flop your category over. So it's one of those things, make sure you have a compelling case, you have your data, you have the support of the shelter leadership, look at the flow chart, see where you may fall, and then apply. And if we need to adjust the application, we can do that on the back end.
I can say from working with John and Carolyn and our other regional strategists who look at these, we care a lot more about funding the project that's going to save lives than we do about the name that you applied for it under. We can help you adjust if it's not correct, and we'll put you in the place where you're going to be most competitive. I also meant to ask earlier about who we're getting information from for these letters of support from impact shelters. Does that need to come from any particular person at that impacted shelter?
Your best person would be someone in the leadership hierarchy or the manager or supervisor directly over the program within the shelter you're looking to impact. So say you have a shelter manager and a director, and the shelter manager who overseeing large dogs writes a letter of support for your friends of group to do a transport program. That would weigh very heavily because you have cooperation from the leadership in the shelter to implement this program.
Thank you. All right, let me give you another data question, Sally. What if the data from past years, they think there might be some issues with it? Or what if they just don't have data from 2024, but they have started a process of collecting it really reliably more recently?
Well, first and foremost, congratulations on making that great decision to start collecting it reliably. I think that my guess is, perhaps John and Carolyn can speak better since they are evaluators in this process, but it wouldn't hurt to still go ahead and fill out the LOI, even if you don't have the required data. Perhaps there are other creative ways they can look at, establishing a baseline even if you're not sure if you have the exact data points that we might be looking for. It sounds to me like that would be something that might need a little bit of a one-on-one evaluation. I'm sorry, Caitlin, was there a second part to that question before? What if we don't have 2024?
What if they have the data, but they think it's questionable?
That's also something that, we can help you look at that. So if you're tracking, it's another thing that the module that I mentioned earlier in the presentation might be helpful for. There are some examples, even some little sort of trial questions that you can do on there. So if you're not sure if something's categorized appropriately, we could help you work through that.
So we are just about at the end of time, and we've got 42 unanswered questions. So I know that this is a lot of opportunity for you all, and you're really invested. Since we're not going to be able to get to all of those, I'm going to summarize some best practices that we've already talked about today. So one is get in touch with your regional strategist. They can direct you towards what's going to be the most impactful project for your organization or the community or the organizations that you want to help. Number two is going to be gathering data to the best of your ability. We know that it's not always going to be an easy thing if you're working with an impact shelter. We know that you might have just started collecting data really reliably, but we're asking you to provide what you have available, make plans to continue sharing that data and assessing that data to make life-saving decisions. And that includes if you're an organization that does intakes and outcomes, but also if you're an organization who is intake diversion or community engagement as well. Think about what impact you are having that you can show to us. And the last thing I'll leave you with is part of the reason we do this webinar is because there are real people reading your proposals. These are people who are in shelters every day, who understand how complex this is going to be. And so we want to hear your ideas. We don't really care if it's like perfect writing or if it's this brand new program no one's ever heard of before, especially for a Save Them All grant. Like, we want you to do what's impactful, and we can have conversations to help you refine, because at the end of the day, we're all here to make sure that all the cats and dogs that we can save are being saved. You have our contact information. If you have further questions, we are going to send out the recording and the deck. LOI opens Monday, and we wish you all the best of luck with applying for these. Thank you.